In a car and plane-centric America, you don't take the train to get somewhere fast. But in today's video, I'll be doing exactly that, as what if I told you that the US has a high-speed train? Amtrak's Acela Express is the fastest train in the United States, reaching a top speed of 150 miles per hour on the bustling Northeast Corridor, and today I'll be travelling on its cheapest accommodation at its lowest price as we travel from the Big Apple of New York City down to the capital Washington DC, to see whether it's actually worth the money. Now join me as the journey continues. But of course, no visit to New York City is complete without a trip on the subway, and a few minutes later, we're where we need to be, New York's Pennsylvania station. The building just in front of us is New York's Moynihan train hall, the main hub for long-distance trains in and out of the city. This is New York City's former main post office, which now acts as the main face of the newly expanded Penn station just across the street, which is still in use for NJ Transit, though Amtrak and Long Island Railroad trains now use this newer and frankly less depressing concourse. As well as onward higher cycle and Flixbus connections, I also came across a Yellowstone exhibit, which to my surprise was being filmed. I wonder if I made the final cut. But anyway, Moynihan Train Hall itself dates back to 1914, back in its post office days, and over 100 years later was reconstructed to alleviate the congestion at Penn Station, finally opening to the public in 2021. It was named after former US Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was a long-time campaigner and champion of the expansion. Having used the original Penn Station several times with NJ Transit during my time in New York, the improvements are very noticeable and it's much more fit for purpose for Amtrak's flagship services along the Northeast Corridor. As a tourist as well, it's certainly a lot more welcoming than its predecessor. It also seems like further works are going on here too, though I'm not sure if this is for an expansion or just general repairs and upkeep. One thing I like as well is how easy it is to get around. Everything is in one place, including the ticket offices for the Long Island Railroad and our operator today, Amtrak, the US's national railway company, where you can also check in large luggage as much like the airlines, there are specific bag limitations when using long-distance railways in North America, so something to bear in mind. There is also a decent sized food hall here, and even an Irish pub, but my recommendation is to go to the supermarkets or grocery stores and other stall carts here before boarding. There is a cafe car on the Acela, though this is rather expensive as we'll see later on. Speaking of which, our train today is Acela 2153, the 10 AM departure to Washington DC. One thing you may notice is that the platform numbers are not actually shown. Platforms are usually shown for Amtrak services between 15 to 20 minutes before departure, which consequently results in incredibly long queues like this. This is for the 0925 Northeast Regional to Washington DC, the slower yet cheaper alternative to the Acela on the Northeast Corridor, which I'll have more to say about in a future video. Moynihan Train Hall does have a Metropolitan Lounge for Acela passengers, as was the case with Penn Station. However, believe it or not, the Acela is one of the few transport offerings where first class is actually higher than business class, so my business class ticket on its own won't grant me access. I'll instead be granted free access to the waiting area here, available to all Amtrak and Long Island Railroad passengers. Sadly, there wasn't much time to relax here, as our Acela service arrived in early from Boston and boarding commenced not long afterwards. If you have a first class ticket, you get priority boarding from a separate line, but business class has to join the main scrum heading down to the surprisingly narrow platforms. But anyway, patiently waiting for us on track 13 is our train, a first generation Acela Express train set. Amtrak originally operated 20 of these trains, built by Bombardier and Alstom between 1998 and 2001, though I believe several are now out of service as spares to keep the remainder of the fleet going. Each train set is formed of a power car at each end, derived from French TGV technology, as well as 6 passenger coaches derived from the Bombardier LRC coaches used by Canada's Via Rail, albeit much heavier to comply with US crashworthiness standards. The Acela is Amtrak's flagship service and the fastest train in North America, reaching 150 miles per hour on certain sections of track, though with an average speed of around 70 miles per hour across the entire length of the Northeast Corridor. Safe to say this is the world's slowest high-speed train. Can you think of any slower ones? Each Acela has one first-class carriage, a cafe car, and 4 business-class carriages. Business class is the equivalent of coach class on the Acela and is its cheapest offering, and I'll be in coach 5 towards the rear of the train to Washington this morning. First stop, Metro Park. Business class on the Acela is in a 2x2 configuration and features a mixture of airline and table seating. One great thing about the airline seats is that they can be rotated to face the direction of travel, though as to be expected this isn't the case for the table seats, which are more ideal for travelling in groups. Amtrak also recently introduced reserved seating on the Acela, which can be changed through the app after booking. Today's route sees us travel on the southern portion of the Northeast Corridor as we cross the states of New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware and Maryland en route to Washington DC, reaching 150 miles per hour during part of the trip. We eventually arrive into Washington DC at around 1:45, taking just under 3 hours to cover the 247-mile distance. Not bad. Our departure from New York City is on time at 10 AM Eastern Standard Time. As you've probably noticed by now, Penn Station itself is underground, and getting out of it means we have to traverse the North River tunnels. As the name suggests, these tunnels, opened in 1910, go directly under the Hudson River and carry rail traffic between Manhattan and the state of New Jersey. The construction of 2 new tunnels was approved by the US government in May 2021. Known as the Gateway Tunnels, these are expected to increase traffic on the southern half of the Northeast Corridor, which is currently at full capacity, and is expected to be completed in 2035. Emerging from the tunnel just over 5 minutes later sees us in the state of New Jersey, and almost immediately afterwards we start to cross the Portal Bridge over the Hackensack River, which is just as old as the tunnels we just traversed and one of the oldest pieces of infrastructure on the Northeast Corridor. The bridge is often known as the Achilles heel of the Northeast Corridor, however, owing to its 60 mph top speed and frequently having to be raised to allow boat traffic to pass, which often causes frequent delays. The solution to this, however, is just to the right. The Gateway project, which I mentioned earlier, is also facilitating the replacement of the bridge with the much higher and faster Portal North Bridge, which as you can see is substantially complete, being at around 70% when I travelled. Final completion of this 90 mph bridge is expected in 2027. Speaking of delays, the Northeast Corridor is one of the few lines in the US which is principally owned by Amtrak. Most American lines and track are owned by the freight companies, meaning Amtrak doesn't get priority if there are delays in most instances. But the script is flipped on the Northeast Corridor, which allows rail to be more competitive with road and air travel. We then cross the Passaic River using the dock bridge as we pass through Newark's Penn Station. Weirdly enough, this is one of the few Acela services not to serve the station, which is the busiest in New Jersey and the 7th busiest in North America as a whole. We instead call at Metro Park, which serves the Iselin section of New Jersey's Woodbridge Township and is one of 2 park and ride infill stations on the Northeast Corridor, the other being Capital Beltway in the state of Maryland, which closed in 1983. Anyhow, let's now get into the nitty-gritty and check out the interior of business class. If there's one thing Amtrak does well, it's seat comfort. Both the padding and ergonomics are very good and certainly a lot better than what you'd get in economy on domestic flights between New York and Washington. One thing I would say though is they are getting a bit tired as shown by the foldable armrests here, with the window side not only containing the seat's generous recline function but also an entertainment system, though I'm not sure if this still works. Let me know below if you can confirm. At each seat you'll find 2 US power sockets, though these didn't appear to be working when I tried them. But on a more positive note at least, the legroom in business class is fantastic, minus the footrest which can be kept folded away if you don't want to use it. Just in front is a tray table which is pulled out like so. The Acela is aimed at business travellers, so naturally holds a large laptop, or in my case, snacks from the station very well. There is also a seat back pocket behind this, which contains a leaflet for the onboard safety features on the Acela. The reading lights in business class can be found just above the seat, and just underneath the incredibly spacious overhead luggage storage, which is very similar to that on an aircraft. For larger items, you can make use of the larger racks present in the vestibules, though bear in mind the restrictions. Finally, there are curtains if you want to block out the surprisingly intense sunlight for November, or get a bit of shut-eye. All in all, this is a very good interior, though it's quite outdated considering this is largely the same from when the sets entered service in the early 2000s, the reason for which we'll come to later. This is still preferable to a plane any day though, as I'm sure you'll agree. Progressing through New Jersey is where the real fun begins, as the section of track between New Brunswick and South Brunswick is one of 4 segments of the Northeast Corridor where the Acela can reach its current maximum speed of 150 miles per hour. Previously, the Acela was limited to 135 miles per hour between New York and DC. However, infrastructure upgrades completed in 2022 have allowed for the full 150 miles per hour to be reached, with a further segment up to Trenton to be completed sometime soon. Princeton Junction is one of the stations we pass at full speed. Here you can also catch the shortest passenger train in North America, the Dinky, which takes 5 minutes to complete end to end. This will of course be coming to the channel soon, so stay tuned. Another thing to note is the Acela train sets also have an active tilting mechanism, which we can see in action here. The Northeast Corridor has a large amount of sharp curves throughout the route, and the Acela sets counter the centrifugal force by tilting up to 6.5 degrees around curves to improve overall ride quality, which I didn't find to be too bad on the whole, but definitely not the best I've experienced. Trenton is the last station we pass in New Jersey, and a sign we're about to cross into Pennsylvania, which we do after crossing the Delaware River. On the approach to our next stop, Philadelphia, we can see a large amount of Amtrak's next generation Acela train sets, the Avelia Liberty, of which 28 are being manufactured by Alstom to replace the 20 legacy train sets. There's no avoiding the elephant in the room though that these train sets are massively delayed. Originally meant to be in service of 2023, they were then pushed back to the end of 2024 when I visited the US, and are now expected to enter service in spring 2025 as it currently stands. But will they really? The new train sets will allow Acela services to reach 160 miles per hour and possibly faster on the Northeast Corridor, though this is dependent on further infrastructure upgrades. I'm certainly looking forward to trying them out. Our next call is Philadelphia's 30th Street station, which is where a large amount of people got off. Philly is the most populous city in the state of Pennsylvania, and the station was named in honor of William H. Gray III in 2020, who represented Pennsylvania's 2nd Congressional District from 1979 to 1991. After Philly, the route begins to get a nicer ratio of scenic to industrial landscape, as we pass along the Schuylkill River continuing on to DC, with a lot less people on board than I was expecting. Anyway, a quick look inside the rest of the train. There are honestly no further differences with the rest of the business class carriages, though Car 2 at the front of the train towards Washington is the dedicated quiet zone, which is ideal if you don't want to be disturbed during the journey. Towards the end of each business class coach is a generous space for wheelchair users, which is located next to both the standard and accessible toilets, again being in all carriages on board. There are a few bits of toilet paper on the floor, but I can't otherwise complain about cleanliness, and even if it is a bit outdated, it does the job. Inside as well is a baby changing facility, coat hooks, and an electrical shaver socket. There are also cups and water dispensers in the vestibules too, which I don't think I've seen before except on Avanti West Coast back in the UK, and even that's a recent addition. But to be honest, I wouldn't recommend drinking it if you can. And here is first class, located at the very front of the train towards Washington. The differences to business class being the 2x1 seating layout, a slightly larger seat, lounge access, priority boarding, and a meal being included in the ticket price. I will be having a review out of first class at some point early next year between New York and Boston, but spoiler alert, starting at $304 on the New York to Washington route, I would honestly recommend sticking with business class. On that note, there's no catering included in the price of a business class ticket as I mentioned earlier, so you'll instead have to settle for purchasing food at the cafe car if you want it. It's also recommended to tip if you can, as is the custom in the US, so usually around a couple of dollars. It wasn't too busy when I paid a visit, so I was able to buy some snacks and have a sit down, though prices are deliberately inflated on the Acela owing to it being a premium product. As always, the menu is linked in the description below. The next stop for our train is Wilmington, Delaware. The soon-to-be former President Biden used to commute to Washington from this station during his time as a senator, this station being named after him in 2011 due to his consistent advocacy for passenger rail in the United States. To cross Maryland, Northeast Corridor trains have to traverse the Bush and Gunpowder rivers, and here we can be seen crossing the former, before eventually moving on to cross the latter. These rivers are just north of our last stop of Baltimore, though for some reason we were stopped out here for quite a while, possibly due to congestion?
Baltimore station stop now, right?
The final section to Washington sees us travelling at 110 miles per hour, where we try and make up the delay made from our earlier stop, which is helped by skipping a number of stops that would otherwise be made by the Northeast Regional and some slower Acelas. To conclude, I enjoyed my time on Amtrak's Acela. Compared to older videos I saw, I definitely think there are efforts being made by Amtrak to improve the service, such as by introducing reserved seating, though I was disappointed with a small snack or drink not being included with the ticket. Even the business class on the Northeast Regional includes a free drink with the ticket. Another issue with this train is the infrastructure constraints, which I believe limit the potential of the Acela, though I'm hoping once the new Avelia Liberty sets are introduced and the projects across the corridor are completed, this should be one step closer to resolving this. On that note, I paid $83 for my one-way ticket to Washington, which is the cheapest price you can get when booking in advance. I booked this 2 weeks in advance, which is pretty good going as fares are dynamically priced, and between New York and Washington DC, the Acela is a fantastic option if you can get the right fare like I did. As for New York to Boston, well, you'll have to wait for my first class review for my honest opinion of why it's better to take the Northeast Regional on that portion. Anyway, the earlier delay outside of Baltimore means we arrive into Washington's Union Station 12 minutes late, yet still within 3 hours, not bad. Now you've heard from me, I want to hear from you. Have you travelled on Amtrak's Acela before? What do you think of it, and do you think it's worth the money? Let me know in the comments. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and don't forget to like and share it if you did to aid the channel's growth, as well as subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more content such as this weekly. I'll leave you with some shots of Washington Union Station before I go and look around, as it was actually the inspiration for a certain European railway station, which has been featured on the channel before, which I'm sure you can guess in the comments below. Thanks so much for coming with me on this trip, and I look forward to bringing you with me on my next one.